you're allowed to share. Could this have been the work of a serial killer?
Well, I think like most people, because the trail is not well known, it's not a big tourist spot, and because the bridge itself is something you wouldn't cross unless you were familiar with the area. And the bridge was abandoned 30 years ago. And when you see the person walking across it with his head down, it's because it's not safe to cross that bridge. The bridge was not part of the trail. The trail terminated at the bridge. And so most people, I believe, and most people in law enforcement thought it must be a local person, because why would anybody be there? Why would you be familiar with that trail? But on the other hand, the crime is so, it's impossible to think of a motivation for the crime. Generally, when you have a murder in rural Indiana, Carroll County, the motive was obvious, the suspect was obvious, and in this case, the two girls were murdered. And as I told people, the crime scene is very unusual. It's all very strange. And so while we certainly thought in the early days it would be solved in 2 or 3 days, now I have to wonder if it wasn't a semi-random crime of the sort that we occasionally have in this country, where a person had an opportunity and they committed these murders, but still it doesn't make any sense for them to be there just outside of Delphi, Indiana.
So without giving up details that could compromise the investigation, you said there's some unique physical aspects to the scene.
Well, as this 4-year anniversary has come up and some people have wanted to talk to me, it has made me think about something I've been concerned about. Besides the fact of the video and the audio, which is amazing evidence to have from a crime scene, as I've told people, if you had arrived at this crime scene where the girls' bodies were found, there were 3 or 4 physical characteristics of the crime scene that you absolutely would take pictures of. Now, law enforcement has good reasons why they don't want to release information. I am not involved in the investigation in any way. I hope that people who are handling the investigation will consider whether perhaps it might be time to release some more of that information. So connections to other crimes in other places, or if someone had ever spoken to the perpetrator of this crime, perhaps it would give them a clue that they had learned something from the perpetrator.
So just trying to connect these dots a little bit, if another crime scene had some of these unique characteristics that are worth photographing, could you connect that and potentially think this is the work of a serial killer?
Well, I think so. I'm no expert on serial killers, but I can tell you in the early days of this investigation, of course, law enforcement, the FBI, the Indiana State Police, Carroll County Sheriff's Department were looking for crimes in other locations that might have similar characteristics. But of course, the public doesn't know some of these similar characteristics. And even then, the characteristics they were looking for tended to be more general things than the items I'm talking about. And I'm not certain of the exact significance of these things, but they are very unusual.
As a former prosecutor, are you confident this case will be solved? That's the real question our audience has.
Confidence is a difficult word. People ask me, do I think it'll be solved? And I think it will be, but I can't give you strong reasons for that. I'm hopeful. When people commit a horrifying crime, they feel compelled to confess. They feel compelled to brag. I can't help but think that the person who committed these crimes will talk to somebody at some point, or someone will realize, gosh, this person said something to me that makes me nervous, concerned about this. If it's someone you care about, you'll think of all sorts of rationalizations to not believe they committed a terrible crime, but we know terrible crimes get committed. So I think that's a possibility. And in addition, I don't hope for this, but there's always the possibility that someone will be caught committing another crime, as serial killers have sometimes been caught in this country, and will confess to this crime here in Delphi, Indiana.
Well, Godspeed to you and all the things you're doing now. I appreciate you sharing insights.
I knew the girls were missing the day before. And I can tell you, I at least, and I think most people thought, oh, well, they're hanging out with friends. They've had a fight with mom. No such thing happened. Don't misunderstand me. But we didn't think much about it. And when the next day, when their bodies were found, it was shocking to everybody. It was certainly shocking to me because in Carroll County, such a crime was unprecedented. People kill each other sometimes, but generally it's a crime of passion. It's about boyfriends, girlfriends, husband, wives. or some emotional dispute. We've never had, in my time, I was first prosecutor in 1987, we never had a murder in a robbery or a random murder. We had drunk driving deaths, we had murders of husbands and wives, but nothing like this. And so it was tremendously shocking. And the outpouring of law enforcement support was incredible then, because not only did the FBI come in extreme numbers, but the law enforcement, the police departments in the surrounding counties, the sheriff's departments, the city police departments, they all sent detectives. And in those early days, there were plenty of leads, but there was no great lead. People have asked me sometimes, was there a point where y'all knew who did it, but you couldn't prove it? No. When I was involved, that point was never reached. There was never a time where we thought, this is the person, we just don't have enough to charge. But there was so much physical evidence of the crime, and the crime had been found so immediately after it had been committed, that it's the sort of thing that experienced law enforcement officers, experienced investigators all believe, oh, this is going to be solved really quickly. And normally it would be. It's shocking to me that it hasn't been solved today. In today's world, we have cell phone evidence and we have DNA evidence. But if you had been a police officer in 1960 and you had arrived at this crime scene with the traditional physical evidence that was there, and then not to mention the fact, of course, we had video and audio of the person I think certainly killed the girls, you would be certain you were going to catch them within 48 hours. So when you add in the fact that we have evidence today, or we have investigatory methods that we didn't have in the 60s, all police officers, I believe anybody who was involved, I doubt anybody in that first 24 hours had any doubt it was going to be solved within 2-3 days. And
just from the evidence at the scene?
Yes. The circumstances of the crime, yes. Mm-hmm. And, then after that, what happened was they developed a system where when there were tips or there were hints or there were reason to believe somebody was in the neighborhood, they would we had so many officers working on it that the guys they give them sheets, in effect, go find these people and interview them about where they were that day and so on. And so there was this unbelievable manpower, totally unprecedented in my experience, working on this and enthusiastically and passionately. And I would have been certain. If you had asked me at the time, I said, next couple of days, they're going to find a suspect and action's going to be taken. Not because I had any particular feeling about a particular thing. It's just because of the circumstances of the crime.
At the scene.
Yes. I've told people before, there were times in those early days, it'd be late at night, and guys wouldn't go home because they thought, no, we're going to go out and do this, and then we're going to solve this, because that's the perception everybody had. Not because we had necessarily a really good lead, just because it just seemed like, well, of course this is going to be solved. The location is it's not a tourist attraction or anything. If you weren't from around here, you'd have no reason to even know such a place existed. The trail actually terminates at the bridge. The girls had gone out because it was a beautiful day, 52 degrees, as I recall, in February. They just decided we're going to go out for a walk. And I remember at the time, I would see on the internet nationally people saying, I can't believe those girls were out there, as it was the wilderness. You could walk from my office downtown out to where they were in 20 minutes, maybe half an hour tops. And you could drive there in 2 minutes, 3 minutes. And so it was just on the edge of town. In fact, there were houses. In fact, where the crime scene is, there's a house up on a hill that can actually look down. The backyard can look down and see that house, or the crime scene, I should say. And so the idea that they were someplace dangerous, I wouldn't have hesitated to have my child at that age to be walking out there. That's another thing that's shocking about the whole thing. Well, I guess I fear at this point that the most likely thing is, and this is a terrible thing to hope for, is that some other crime would be solved, and the person, as has sometimes happened in the past, the person would say, I committed this crime in Delphi also. I started to say, on the one hand, because it's not a very famous kind of place, I always tend to think it was a local person. But the fact that it's not been solved And the fact there doesn't appear to be any motivation for it, it appears to be a serial killer type of thing. I'm not saying it is, I don't know, but makes me wonder if it wasn't a random act by somebody who isn't around here all the time, but I don't know. I mean, I'd like to tell you I have a strong feeling about that, but I don't. Early on, I would have said, well, it's surely somebody local, because who would know to be out there? Why would you be out there? Why would you even expect to find any other human beings out there in February?
So
and it's broad daylight. This is something that needs to be emphasized. This is not like these girls were in a back alley in the middle of the night. They're in broad daylight.